and thank you so much for joining us. Today's sexologist, Chantal Fowler, shares how to nurture intimacy in your relationship. Then get tips from occupational therapist Amy Isaacs on how to control anger before it controls you. And explore the joys of getting outdoors. Yes, stay in your seats, Mzansi, because we have a jam-packed show for you today. Now on social media, you know we love hearing from you, and today's social media question goes a little bit like this. Whether it's deep breaths, therapy, going for a walk, meditation, or maybe something else, how do you manage your anger? Remember to use the hashtag Afternoon Express in all of your comments. But let's get today's show started. Talking about our sexuality and sexual health is often seen as taboo, but nurturing your sex life is essential for developing and maintaining a healthy and fulfilling relationship. Joining us to explore this topic is clinical psychologist and sexologist Chantal Fowler. Welcome to The Loft, Chantal.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, for a lot of people who might be not too sure what a sexologist is and what they do, you are qualified as one. So what does the job entail?
So I kind of see it as 4 different segments. We help people in 4 areas of sexuality. One of them would be your sexual identity, which is how you identify who you like to have sex with, essentially. Then there is gender, how you want to present yourself in the world in terms of gender. Yeah. And then what I call the mechanics of sex, which is essentially what's happening in the bedroom or the kitchen or the garage or wherever you like to be having sex. And then the 4th one is what we refer to as more the fringe areas of sex, kink, BDSM, just exploring those boundaries of sexuality. So that's pretty much the 4 areas that we like to help people in terms of their sex life.
It's truly a holistic vision or a holistic perspective on tackling intimacy and a sex life. So how important is it for us to have a healthy sex life, not only for our own benefit, but just for that relationship and relationship closeness?
Definitely. So yeah, there's tons of research out there that actually tells you about sex is really good for you. It can prolong your life, it helps blood pressure, can reduce cancer, the possibility of cancer in men. Sex is actually really, really healthy for you physically. But obviously within the sexual relationship in a partnership, having a healthy sex life really promotes getting past vulnerabilities, emotional intimacy. I think one of the biggest things that I find in clinical practice is a lot of people hold a lot of shame around sex. And when you can get past that shame with a sexual partner, it's a really beautiful way to develop true emotional intimacy. Wow. So I think it's critical, it's pivotal to a healthy life and a healthy partnership with a sexual partner.
Now, look, I know that we are operating from our Afternoon Express loft, but I feel like I heard a whole lot of people sitting on their couch, guys and girls, saying, yes, sex prolongs my life. But that's what it's about, being able to communicate, explore and speak to your partner for that closeness and intimacy. As something that I have found a lot of people struggle with is just separating the two. Sex is one thing, but intimacy is also something else. So being able to differentiate the mechanics, as you call them, to just that closeness and vulnerability to your partner, how important is differentiating the two? Whether it's holding hands at a mall, whether it is cuddling your partner, kissing, hugging.
I love that question. I'm so glad you asked it. So one of the things that I often present to people is to ask the question, what do you consider successful or good sex? Okay. Does someone else have to be in the room with you for you to have good sex, for example? And often in partnerships, people don't ask their partner what they consider to be good sex. And they make assumptions about what their partner likes. And because of the taboos around sex, because of the shame we all hold, it's very difficult to have these conversations. And so often there are walls that develop between partners. And so I think it's really important that you identify for yourself, firstly, what you find enjoyable about sex, and then you learn to communicate that with your partner. And as sexologists, we always like to say that sex starts with the slightest kiss, with the cutest emoji. We can define sex however we want to, and you need to ask yourself, is sex about the process of exploring intimacy and pleasure, or is it about the objective of having an orgasm? And I think there is so much more that you can explore when sex is not just about an objective you're trying to achieve. And it's a beautiful thing when you learn to redefine those boundaries of how we're going to define what is good sex, what is healthy sex, what is fun sex. So many different ways that we can think about sex.
And I'm so glad that you brought up having sex for an objective. A lot of times we see in couples that have been together for a long time that maybe the objective is having a baby.
Yeah.
Right, conceiving. So sex ends up feeling like more of a chore and more of something to put in your schedule than something that is fun and that is lighthearted, or maybe just rebuilding that connection with a partner that you might feel a bit distant towards. So how important also is that differentiating factor to not make it a job?
Yeah, great question as well. I think a lot of couples think that if they have to be intentional, schedule sex, see a therapist about sex, Google something they don't understand, then there's something wrong with it, because there's this misconception probably from movies that you meet someone and then you just go home and you have great sex for the next 20 years. And like everything else in life, you've got to talk about how to manage money. You've got to ask people, experts, how do I manage my money? You've got to speak about how do I manage in-laws? How do we plan holidays? I always say, if you are at the point where you're having to ask for advice about sex and you're having to be intentional about how to have a healthy sex life, that's what's right with you as a couple. That's not what's wrong with you as a couple. Because sex doesn't just happen magically. Sex is magical and beautiful, but you do have to be intentional about it. And even if there is sex that's like, let's have a baby, we're ovulating now, my advice is have fun with that idea. Don't try not to make it feel like a chore, or talk about the fact that this feels like a chore. And if it is a chore, that's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Like, it's okay for there to be an objective sometimes. But I think overall, putting effort and energy into your sex life, like you do with your mental health, like you do with your body, like you do with every other aspect of your health, you've got to be intentional about nurturing your sex life.
So then, Chantal, I'm so glad that you spoke about the fact that this does have an impact on your overall well-being. So what is that link between your sexual health, your mental, your physical, and your emotional stability?
So I think for me, the link is about the vulnerability that sex, sex is a very vulnerable act, even with yourself, even self-pleasuring. It takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of breaking down the barriers and the taboos and the shame that, like we've spoken about previously, to really get to the place where you feel comfortable about your sexuality. And if you can feel that way with yourself, it makes it so much easier to feel that way with the people that you're having sex with. And when that sexual connection flows freely and easily, my belief is that if you trust yourself there, you can trust yourself in so many other areas of your life, whether that's your career, whether that's your sport. If you learn to trust your vulnerability and not be ashamed of it, it's a very, very powerful tool to bring you much higher levels of mental health in every other area of your life.
Absolutely. Well, this conversation truly is so pivotal, and I think it comes at the right time where so many of us are maturing, getting into that next stage or level of life, and we need to not only understand all the other aspects of life, but sexual health and intimacy is something that needs to be nurtured. Well, Chantal, do not move a muscle, because we have you for part 2 of this incredible conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Now, Chantal's advice has given us a deeper understanding of how vital a healthy sex life is to overall well-being and relationship satisfaction. After the break, we continue this conversation and we tap into anger management. Trust me, you don't want to move a muscle for that. But for now, we have great news for you budding bakers out there. Let's take a look.
This Tuesday at 7 on the Tastemaster SA, our top 4 contestants must bake to impress a fine dining chef with Michelin star experience.
I think we're going to stretch these guys to the max today.
Final 4 is the time to do it, right?
Yeah.
Who will earn a spot in the semi-finals? That's the Tastemaster SA, proudly brought to you by Royal Baking Powder. Tuesday evening at 7 on SABC2. Repeat Wednesday at 1 and Sunday at 4 p.m.
Welcome back. We now continue our conversation with Chantal Fowler on nurturing your sex life. Chantal, we've already touched base on so many different important topics when it comes to nurturing a healthy sex life and intimacy with your partner. But what are some of those obstacles that couples experience and how are they able to overcome them?
Yeah. So I think the first one, as I've mentioned before, is shame. And because of that shame, people are not wanting to talk. They're making assumptions about what's happening in the bedroom. They're not saying what they like, what they don't like, what they want, because they're assuming their partners are going to judge them for it. And if we speak about just the genders, the male and female genders, I think generally women are they embody a lot more shame around sex and are socialized to believe that they shouldn't like sex, that they shouldn't want sex. And there's the concept of slut shaming that happens. And it's really complicated. And I find a lot of women find it very difficult to be honest about what they like, what they don't like, and to express that to partners. And then I think equally a lot of people who are socialized as men, the idea of toxic masculinity around, they need to be able to perform for 15 hours at a time, and that's how you make a woman happy. And again, those are all myths. There is no one way to, a lot of people have asked me, like, how do I be a good lover, or how do I do this sexual act really well? And my answer is there is no objective way to do that well. If you want to know how to do that well, ask the person you're doing it with how they like it to be done. That is how you have good sex. You ask the person or people you're having sex with what they like and how they like it. And then also another issue is be honest when those likes are not compatible. Not everybody's likes are always going to be compatible. And sometimes you have to be honest about that. Yeah. So, you could have a beautiful, wonderful, romantic, intimate relationship, but you have different likes and desires sexually. And people kind of ignore that and think that because we're in love, I'm sure we'll just figure the sex part out. And you've got to understand that after 10 years of being with someone who likes sex in a completely different way that you like sex, that's going to become a problem. And we need to have the very difficult conversations about that.
So you've already touched base on practical tips. For one, have a conversation. Yeah. Be open, be honest, and be able to connect with your partner first in communication before it even leads to the bedroom. Right. What other practical tips might you have for us to maintain and nurture a healthy sex life?
The other thing about communication is communicate early on in the relationship. I say first, second, third date, start touching on this area. What are your expectations about sex? What do you like? What do you expect? Because people often only really start talking about sex 3 years into the relationship when they start having problems with sex, and that's the first time they start communicating about it. So communicate very early on. And the other thing is we are so lucky now. There is so much information out there. There are brilliant sex therapists that are available, even just on Instagram. You can Google things. There are courses you can buy online. We actually have so many amazing sex therapists here in South Africa as well. Go and seek the help if you can afford it. Go and seek the help, and if you can't afford the actual therapy, like I said, so many resources are available online. Use those resources. And when you and your partner watch those things together, that helps you break down those barriers and gets you to the place where you can have those honest, more conversations about sex more easily.
And I'm going to speak about two opposite ends of the spectrum. Let's start with the young. If you are a parent to a preteen, first and foremost, when is the right time to have the sex talk, the birds and the bees with your child or with the child you're looking after? And secondly, how does one even start? I remember, Mom, shout out to you. I remember the birds and the bees conversations you had with me and my brothers, and that is something that will live with me forever. Yeah. So when is the right time and how do we have the conversation?
So, it's very difficult to say what the exact right time is, but for what parents need to understand is that children as young as 5, 6 now have access to cell phones, Instagram, and they are hearing their friends talking about it. Young kids have siblings who perhaps are older. They're being exposed to sexual content all the time. And so it's your responsibility as a parent, in whichever way you think is relevant, according to your value system, rather have the conversations with your children, rather equip them to understand sex, to think about sex in a way that you think is valuable and helpful. The reason that we end up in these positions where we're so ashamed of sex is because we kind of pick up by 6, 7, 8 years old, oh, this is something adults don't want to talk to me about. I should probably be ashamed of it if I'm starting to experiment or explore. And what we need to do is really break down those barriers. We need to start having conversations, obviously, that are appropriate at that age. But even if it's as simple as, being affectionate with your partner in front of your kids so that they understand that sex is a normal, natural and healthy part of your life. It is not something to be ashamed of. Yeah. And the other thing that you do when you speak to children from a young age and make them feel confident about sex is that they're less likely to then be a victim of sexual abuse because they understand what's happening, they know what's right, they know what's wrong, and they feel like they can talk to adults in their lives when they're exposed to abuse. So it is so, so, so important.
On the opposite end of the spectrum, as you get older, we find men's libido is higher in the 20s and early 30s, and it kind of weakens as they get older. But in reverse, women's libido tends to pick up as they turn 30. How do you navigate that?
Yes, it's so important. You know, this all comes down to like what we define as healthy sex.
Okay.
Often partners have what we call discordant desire, and there's lots of ways you can navigate that. So it's about what does sex have to look like. If your partner wants to have sex more often than you do, for example, do you always have to be fully engaged? Can you be involved in pleasuring your partner if you're not really in the mood that day? And again, it's always about having conversations. It's about negotiating with yourself. It's about compromise. It's about, again, this idea of, is sex always about having an orgasm? Perhaps what your partner wants is just intimacy, actually physical intimacy. Perhaps they're not actually desiring sex as such. And then you can explore what that looks like together.
Thank you so much, Chantel. Your insights and advice around demystifying sex and encouraging us to have healthy sex lives is really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's so wonderful to be able to talk openly about sex on platforms like this. Thank you.
Absolutely.